In this story, our protagonist, Hang, is a corporate slave who is forced to choose between saving his mother's life and keeping the only job that will put food on the table. When he finally decides to stop licking his boss's feet, he unlocks the ultimate money system, which rewards him with girls every time he spends recklessly. After years of being his boss's doormat, Hang's decision to quit his job came when his boss insisted he could only take days off if he had someone to marry or bury. Meanwhile, his boss was busy gifting rockets to someone shaking what her plastic surgeon gave her. Hang tries his best to explain that his mom is hospitalized and needs someone to stay with her. However, his boss advises him to make like his dad and run off to the milk store. While his boss enjoys his live stream, Hang tries to figure out what to say next. Just then, his boss says the company will shut down if every employee gets what they want. In response, Hang promises to keep working and stay in touch while away. Frustrated, his boss tells him to resign and go be a mama's boy if that's what he wants. Then he berates him for being an ungrateful idiot and throwing his life away. Some moments later, while Hang takes a smoke to calm his ravaging nerves, he hears his phone ringing. When he picks up the call, his dad asks if he can come back to the hospital. While on the call, a nurse approaches his dad to remind him of their unpaid medical expenses and says his mother will have to be discharged if they don't pay it soon. Hearing this, Hang says he'll be at the hospital to cover the expenses as soon as he can. However, his dad tells him not to bother since he's gotten loans from some relatives and friends. When Hang insists he's got it covered, his dad tells him not to push himself too hard since he's only a recently inducted hustler. After this, Hang checks his account balance and figures he's got just enough to cover his mom's medical expenses for a while. Feeling he's had enough of the whack job, Hang heads to the HR's office. There, he announced his arrival and was told to come in. A few minutes later, he leaves the office and realizes he is a bold doofus for resigning without a backup plan. Suddenly, a pop-up appears and notifies him that he activated an ultimate reckless system for going against his ancestors' advice. Confused, Hang blames the ladies around for the loud sound he heard in his head. However, the pop-up says he's been rewarded for living recklessly. Just then, his phone vibrates and he gets a notification that his account has been credited. Taking a closer look, Hang thinks it is probably the latest fraud gimmick in town, but gets alarmed when he confirms the notification is from his bank. While Hang freaks out, he gets another pop-up that tells him to live the life he has always wanted since he has awakened a reward system for living recklessly. Hang stares at his screen in disbelief, wondering how he's suddenly swimming in money. He quickly checks his balance again and concludes that he must have activated a system by acting recklessly. At this, he decides to find an opportunity to test his theory. Just then when a dancing influencer walks in and asks if he is done with their live stream operation plan. Mind blown by her melon mountains, Hang's brains leak through his nose and he asks her to repeat herself. She then asks if he's finally found the balls to ask her out, but Hang tells her to stop messing with him. However, she tries to convince him to do her a favor. Hang says someone else will handle it since he doesn't work for the company anymore. Surprised that any sane person could abruptly leave their job, Gao Wen exclaims. While he packs up, Hang thinks the only reason she notices him at work is because he's competent and approachable, so he figures he's probably never going to see her again. Just then, Wen stares him in the eye and asks if he is really leaving. In response, he stutters and says the paperwork is done. Wen then wonders why Hang was immune to her charms since he had always been her simp. When she asks if he is going to leave her, Hang thinks she's only being nice for selfish reasons, so he says he's giving himself a long time off. She suddenly bumps him with her bouncy castles and asks if he plans to join some other company. Driven to the edge by gesture, Hang bleeds out his brains again. When he gets himself together, he decides to make himself more money by going reckless again. So, he looks Gao Wen in the eye and says that her nose looks crooked from excess makeup. Surprised to hear this, Wen covers her nose feeling embarrassed. After this, she reaches into her personal treasure chest and pulls out a mirror. While she checks herself out to see if he's right, Hang watches, feeling nervous and thinking she has to fix the error before she goes live. Suddenly, he gets rewarded for boldly saying what he thinks and refusing to be a simp. Hang checks his phone and discovers he's been credited again. Seeing this, he smiled and made a goofy face. Shortly after, Wen gives Hang a peek at her pleasure mountains to thank him for pointing out her makeup flaw. After this, she says she looks forward to working with him in the future, while Hang stares, surprised that she wasn't offended by his comment. while he thinks she must be pretending, Wen offers to treat him to a farewell dinner and help him get a new job. Hearing this, Hang thinks she must be really nice to make such offers despite being out of his league. To save his dignity, Hang says he should be the one taking her out to dinner. Wen then reminds him that his paycheck could walk across water, but Hang insists that it's his treat. In response, Wen says it's a shame she's just realized how much she doesn't know about him. Pretending not to hear that, Hang says he'll give her a call after work. A few moments later, Hang steps out and thinks about how he used to hustle to get a ride back home. However, it felt like a good day to ball out, so he ordered the most expensive ride he could find. Shortly after, a fancy ride pulls up, and the driver steps out to invite him in. Surprised that rides could arrive that fast, Hang flashes back to his carpooling days and thinks never again. As he approached the car, the driver opened the door. On getting into the car, he gets rewarded again for taking a taxi without using his calculator first. When the driver asks to confirm his destination, Hang says he'd like to make a stop at a pancake shop. After this, the driver hits the throttle and Hang relaxes, feeling like a real boss as the car zooms off. When they arrive at the pancake shop, Hang alights and heads to the counter. The attendant spots him and asks if he wants the usual poor man's budget pack. However, Hang responds and says he wants the best of what's the menu, surprising the other customers. After this, Hang thinks of how much he's spending and laughs at how fast he's leveled up. While Hang suddenly becomes the center of attention, Hang walks out with a mouthful. Just then, he gets another reward for blowing his money like an Arab prince at the shop. Feeling satisfied, Hang determined to spend more when next he visits the shop. While he munched what was left of his lunch, Hang compares being broke as a student with working and still being broke. Feeling all high and mighty, he flings the wrapper into a nearby bin and thinks of where next to burn his money. Shortly after, he spots a mall nearby, and then it occurs to him that it's been so long since he went shopping. He thinks of his fixed dinner date with Wen and decides he'd best get some new drip to look less like a dispatch writer. After this, he finds his way into the mall and explores the luxury brands available. Since he's used to shopping at mini-marts, he marvels at how large the mall is. After spending some time trying to lose his teeth pronouncing the English brand names, he finds an Adidas wannabe with a stripe and a few letters missing. Surprised, Hang wonders why there's no Adidas store despite how big the mall was. After roaming about for a while, he recalls he's only here because he threw all caution to the wind. So he decides to go all out and check out what's so special about the big names. When he stepped into a Louis Vuitton store, the attendants treated him like background noise. Since they were clearly saving their customer service for someone with a black card, the attendants did a head-to-toe valuation on him and designated him as a pauper. Reading the mood in the store, Hang couldn't help but wonder if he really looked like a delivery man. After this, he asks if anyone is going to attend to him. Instead, the staff continued to treat him like one of the mannequins on display. Annoyed, Hang then says that he'd been ready to empty his wallet on some cool drips, but now he'd rather take his money to the brand next door since they were wasting his time. Just then, the attendants realize it's true never to judge a book by its cover. The moment they realized his wallet wasn't on life support, the attendants swarmed him like bees to a flower, armed with tea and fake smiles. Surprised by the sudden change in treatment, Hang realizes that money truly speaks louder than voice. Shortly after, Hang leaves the store with an attendant packing his bags for him. While they went downstairs, the attendant invited Hang to a jewelry appreciation event, and he vaguely said he'd come if he had the time. After this, she offers to deliver the outfits to his house, but Hang says he knows better than to bring home strays. When she tells him to have a good day, Hang overhears some ladies talking about how expensive luxury wear is. He then checks out his packs and smiles, feeling like a baller. Suddenly, he gets rewarded for breaking his lifetime spending record. This makes him realize his new job was reckless spending, so he decides to work harder to become a millionaire. Meanwhile, Wen gets notified of a reservation made at a famous 3-star hotel while talking to her friends. Surprised to hear this, her friends asked her if she was sure Hang didn't make a mistake. In response, another one says he's probably trying to show off by picking another restaurant in the same building. Hearing this, Wen says Hang doesn't think with his butt like she does. After this, they get in Wen's car and decide to check out the spot before crucifying Hang. On their way, Jan says Wen's car is stabler than hers, while Kui advises her on how to get rockets from big shots on her livestream. After her lecture, Kui says she'd gladly be a full housewife to any rich guy who wants her. Facing Wen, she then asks if something stole her voice. In response, Wen reminds her that such men can easily find a replacement for her. Kui then asks Wen if she's ever had such thoughts, but she responds and says she's after money since it doesn't betray like men do. When they arrived at the parking lot, the girls stepped out and Jan asked what the plan was if they had a wrong address. Hearing this, Kui added that they might lose followers if someone caught them snooping around fancy restaurants without having a reservation. Just then, when they arrive, decides to call Hang, but he doesn't pick up, so she assumes he might be busy. After this, Kui takes a jab at sarcasm and suggests that they go upstairs, so Wen agrees and steps into the elevator dreading what might happen next. When they arrive, Wen peeks to see if anyone is there and wonders why Hang isn't picking up. While she places another call through, she is stunned by the voice of an attendant who then asks if they have a reservation. While Wen tries to gather her words, Kui responds and says they do. Wen then adds that it should be under Hang's name. While Kui smiles hoping they get tossed out, the attendant asks them to follow her and says Hang has been waiting for them, surprising Kui. While they follow the attendant, Kui envies Wen because many suckers were dying to get her attention. After this, she thought Hang must surely be pretending to be rich. Just then, the attendant asks them to get in the elevator and takes them up. As they went up, Jean suggested that they confirm that it's really Hang, since it would be embarrassing if they were mistaken. Meanwhile, Kui was excited, hoping to find out that Hang had been pranking them all along. Shortly after, the attendant ushers them into a suite and asks them to sit. While they wonder where Hang was, Jan pulls out her phone and takes pictures for the gram. Feeling pissed, Kui asks Jan to knock herself out and takes a seat. Jean then checks out her shots, while thinking she might never get the chance. After this, Kui asks Wen if she's gotten any reply yet since they'd look like fools if they were mistaken. Just then, the attendant knocks on a door and informs Hang of his guest's arrival. So Hang steps out and asks if they've been waiting long for him. After this, he orders the attendant to start serving. Surprised to see him, Jean tells Kui to check out Hang's designer outfit. However, she is busy wondering if he is an undercover trust fund kid. While Hang talks to Wen, Kui wonders how she got so lucky. Just then, Hang notices Wen's friends and identifies Jan. However, he asks Kui who she is and she introduces herself. In response, Hang says beauty filters are lifesavers for the ugly. Kui then says it's because her makeup is light. After this, Wen explains herself for bringing hungry extras along while a train of servers enters the room. While she stares at the food wondering how much it costs, Jan asks her if Hang resigned from his job to take over a family business. Wen responds and says she has no idea either. Unimpressed by what was served, Hang stares at the cow dung placed before him. Just then, Jean asks if she could take pictures of the food, so he tells her to feel free. While Jan took her pictures, Kui asked Wen if she was deliberately keeping them in suspense. In response, Wen says she barely knows Hang and only knows that he's pretty good at what he does. After this, Wen thinks Hang might be a low-profile rich kid who revealed his wealth to prevent a girl from paying for his dinner. Facing the attendant, Hang asks if they had anything filling on the menu. Impressed by his request, Jean yaps about how unsatisfied she had been at her past dinner dates. The attendant then lists all the other dishes on the menu. However, Hang says the names were killing his appetite and requested for large meats cut into chunks. Hearing this, Jan says it's her first time seeing someone order that much food in a high-end restaurant. While Wen stares speechlessly at Hang, Kui says it's impossible to get such food in a French restaurant. However, Hang orders the attendant to make grilled kidneys and barbecued skewers. In response, the attendant says that they don't have that on their menu. So Hang requested to see the manager and was told to wait a moment. Shortly after this, the heavyweight champion walks in and introduces himself. He then apologizes to Hang and says they only serve French cuisine. Determined as ever, Hang offers to pay 300,000 for the meal and promises to tip the manager if he can make it happen. His offer stuns everyone in the room, especially the manager who suddenly lit up. Seeing this, Hang taps him on the shoulder and says he looked better with his bossy look. After this, Hang gets a pop-up encouraging him to go as wild as he can with his recklessness. Facing the ladies, he says dining should be all about getting full and John the Glutton suddenly agrees with him. A few moments later, the servers arrived with his requests and served the dishes while Jan freaks out and says money does really talk. After this, she picks up her phone and takes more pictures, while Hang asks the ladies to eat their fill. After a while, with most of the served meat gone, Hang excuses himself to use the restroom. He was barely out of the room when the ladies began valuing his drip. Jan then says he could be working at the company just to get close to Wen. However, she debunks that by saying she's not that cute. While Jean yaps about rich second-generation kids who love to enjoy life, Kui asks Wen if she is moved by Hang's gestures. Just then, Jan also adds that it's heart-fluttering to think about Hang's lavish spending. When Wen doesn't respond, Kui asks if she knows about Hang's background and keeps it from them. In response, Wen says she's not the type to catch feelings for someone she barely knows. After this, Kui reluctantly accepts her explanation and suggests that Hang's lavish lifestyle could be funded by the Bank of Borrow Now. Cry later in response. Jan says they must commend Hang's acting skills if he had really been pretending to be poor. Afterward, Kui suggests that they run a background check on Hang to verify he's from a wealthy family. However, Wen says it's not right to do that to someone who just lavished his money on them. In response, Kui says Hang must be spending that much just to win her devotion and get her emotionally invested before showing his true colors. Unbothered, Wen says she's not interested in any romantic relations with Hang because of his lavish spending. After this, Kui asks Wen to play along whenever she tries to verify his status. A few moments later while they leave, John asks Hang if he has a girlfriend, and he says he's in a love triangle with his office desk and caffeine and barely has the time to think about dating. After this, he imagines himself simping for some lady after a long day at work and shivers at the thought of it. Just then, Kui suggests that they go to a bar and promises to treat them to a few drinks since the night is still young. After Hang agrees, they head out in Wen's car. On their way, Hang thinks about setting up his own media company in the future. When they arrived at the bar, Kui said she could only afford to get 2 drinks for each person and told them not to think she was stingy. While Jean agrees to fill her greedy throat with Kui's paycheck, Wen urges Hang to have a couple of drinks and have fun with them. Shortly after, Hang spots his former boss heading into the bar with 2 baddies. Intrigued, he thought he had never imagined himself visiting the famous bar. The bar was buzzing with life when they entered, and while they sat and observed the fun going on around, Kui checked the menu and decided to get a margarita for herself. She then asks the rest to order whatever they like. Immediately, Jean says she'll be having a pink lady, while Wen says she wants a lime mojito and no alcohol since still has to drive. While Hang mimics a kid lost in Disneyland, the ladies ask what he'll be having, so he says anything will be fine. Following this, Kui orders a Long Island iced tea for Hang, while Jean asks if she plans to get the truth out of him by getting him drunk. In response, Kui asks Jan why they were at the bar in the first place. After a few sips of her drink, Kui says she'd like to try out some amazing but expensive drinks at some other bar. In response, Wen cautions her to stop whatever she is up to. However, Kui insists she must teach Hang a lesson for pretending to be rich. So she called out to him. However, Hang was busy thinking about making more money and meeting some influencers. Kui thinks Hang deliberately ignored her, but he suddenly faces her and responds. Just then, Kui suggests that they play dice since he looks bored to death. When Hang asks about how the game is played, Kui slams the table with the dice cup and says Hang will either strip or pay 10,000 yuan whenever he loses. Just then, Hang reminds her that he was the company's operations manager and he knows that she's a prodigy at playing dice. While Kui stares back speechlessly, Hang says she's probably wondering how a mere operation guy with no right future could afford to eat at an upscale restaurant and dress in top-tier luxury brands. After this, he says he wanted to let things slide because of Wen, but he's not as stupid as she thinks he is since he sees the disdain and suspicion written all over her. Immediately, Hang gets rewarded for speaking his mind and refusing to be a suck-up specialist. Then he reveals he isn't a trust fund kid like they thought. In response, Kui says she was right since he's only a pretender trying to look rich. Hang then tells her to hold on and let him finish. So he stares her in the eyes and promises to give her 300,000 yuan if she can walk out of the bar naked. Hearing this, Kui says he's being outrageous while Wen tries to calm Hang down. However, Kui keeps yapping and says Hang likely doesn't have such an amount of money. To prove her wrong, Hang declares he'll be buying drinks for everyone in the bar till they're all drunk. So he pulls out his card and says he wants to pay right away. After the bar attendants announced the successful payment for the drinks, everyone in the club hailed Hang for being a big spender who could go all out for strangers. While they hailed him, the system rewards Hang for treating everyone at the bar to drinks. Meanwhile, Kui stares in disbelief as Hang returns to their table. Hang then says he knows she usually looks down on poor guys like him, but it doesn't matter since people like her are just ants to him. After this, Hang sits with the other girls while Kui vibrates from being humiliated. A few moments later, while Hang plays the dice by himself, Kui broods silently, so Jean tries to talk to her. However, Kui jumps to her feet and says she has to leave since she's got something to do. Suddenly, she furiously storms out of the bar while Hang observes a minute of silence for the departed. After this, Hang tells the girls that they can continue having fun since he's footing the bills anyway. Just then, Ji, Wen's livestream rival, approaches the table and asks if Wen is trying to drink her sorrows away. Ji goes on and asks why Wen's top fan wasn't at the club with her. In response, Wen says she doesn't talk about work when she's off work. However, Ji accuses her of pretending to be innocent and flaunting her charms while rubbing her cheeks. Wen then slaps off her hands and tells Ji to mind her business. Obviously wanting more drama, Ji tells Wen not to be so distant, so she sits beside her and pulls out her phone to begin a live stream. Shortly after this, Ji begins her live stream and tells her fans she ran into Wen, who doesn't seem to like her very much. Just then, Wen went through her phone and went through fans' comments. After riling her fans up, Ji thought it was the perfect opportunity to take Wen's position as the top dance streamer. While Ji plans her hostile takeover, Wen says she has to pick a call. On the call, Wen was instructed to start live streaming immediately. However, she says she's not in the mood. To her dismay, her boss wouldn't take no for an answer, so he forced her to go live. When Wen returns to the table, Ji pokes fun at her and asks if she's scared. In response, Wen accepted her challenge and they began the PK. Shortly into the PK, Jan announces that Ji is getting so many rockets and yachts. While Wen tries to keep up, she keeps losing her fans to Ji, who is killing the show. Just then, Hang picks up his phone and figures someone is playing dirty. While the live stream progresses, the fans can tell that Wen is tired and looks forced into the PK. Just then, Wen gets a rocket from an anonymous big brother, surprising her. After this, she decides to try harder. Suddenly, a barrage of rockets flies across the screen, while Wen thanks Big Brother for the gifts. Ji suddenly gets bothered, wondering how Wen could have a hidden Big Brother. The tide of the PK suddenly shifts with Wen gaining more and more engagement. Just then, Ji grabs her phone feeling frustrated, while Wen thanks Big Brother for the rockets. Where he sat, Hang asked if there was any point in continuing the show. Just then he gets rewarded by the system for spending money like water. Meanwhile, Jan calls Hang's attention and says the big shot is busy firing rockets again. Unknown to her, Hang is the big shot constantly firing rockets by tapping his screen again and again. At this moment, Wen says she wants to catch her breath, but the rockets keep flying. Just then, Ji's band of big brothers decided it was time to back their girl up, so they gifted Ji some rockets while she thanked each of her gifters. After this, more rockets came flying for Ji and she put in more work. However, Hang asks if they're done, so he resumes tapping on his screen. While he sends more rockets, he gets rewarded by the system for becoming the new top Big Brother. Finally, Wen was announced the winner of the PK, so she thanked Big Brother for his support. Just then, 1,000 more rockets were sent and Wen bows to thank Big Brother. After this, she urges the anonymous gifter not to waste his hard-earned money on her. This gesture won the hearts of the fans in the comments section. Frustrated to have lost and make Wen more famous, Ji leaves the scene furious. Hang then stretches tiredly and says it's time to go to bed. However, he calls out to Ji and tells her not to be discouraged since she has several big brothers in her pocket. While he advises her to work harder, Jan tells Wen that Hang's words must sting Ji like a million bees. However, Wen tells her to be quiet. While Ji stands, feeling defeated, Hang and the ladies leave the bar. Outside the bar, Jan yaps about the look on Ji's face the moment she loses the PK while making jokes about her plans blowing up in her face. After this, Jan says the night was really thrilling for her to have met the #1 tycoon on the platform. Facing Wen, Jan then asks why she isn't freaked out by what just happened. In response, Wen says she just doesn't feel worthy of it. Pissed off, Jan says it doesn't matter and decides she must get closer to this generous big brother. Following this, she decides to send a private message to him. Immediately she sends the message, and Hang's phone rings out. Curiously, the ladies gave Hang the side eye. Jan then asks why his phone sounded when she sent a message to the anonymous big brother. In response, Hang nervously says it must be a coincidence since he's dealing with numerous private messages. However, Wen isn't convinced, so she reminds him how much he has spent that night. Hang then says he has a bit of money, but not enough to spend millions in minutes. Afterward, Wen offers to drive Hang home and asks for his address. Hang then refuses the offer and says he'll take a cab instead. Suddenly, manager he calls when as he steps out of the bar, saying he is glad to run into her. However, she doesn't share his excitement and pretends he isn't there. Just then, manager he spots Hang and blames Wen for inviting an unemployed person like him. Wen then says it was Hang who treated her to dinner. Surprised to hear this, manager he says Wen is probably covering for Hang because she's fallen for him. He then says he knows that some mysterious person covered everyone's bill. After this, manager he then says he understands that poor guys have nothing but sweet mouths to charm girls. Just then, Jan tries to convince her boss that Hang really covered the bills but suddenly gets shut down. Manager he then speaks down on Jan, saying all her fans are fake. Surprised to hear this, Jan asks him about what he means. So manager he says the company had to buy fake followers just to promote her since no one wants to watch her flat cakes jiggle. After this, he calls her a money-losing asset and tells her to learn from Wen. Facing Wen, manager he then asks if she really isn't interested in being a dance streamer anymore. Afterward, he commends her for making so much money and promises to tell the boss to put her in a TV drama on one condition. He then reaches out to touch her and says she'd have to spend the night with him. Hang suddenly grabs his hands and tells him to show some respect. After this, manager he snatches his hand and calls Hang a low-life hero wannabe. He then asks if Hang can afford to give her the resources and money she needs. While Hang faces manager he and tells him to get lost, Wen sees Hang as her knight in LV armor. Just then, she says she'll terminate her contract with the company if the cultured manager harasses her again. Scornfully, manager he reminds Wen that she still has 1 year to fulfill the contract. After this, he adds that the so-called influencers are prostitutes with price tags. After this, manager he says Wen won't be released even if she pays the penalty. Hearing this, Hang says if she can't leave, he'll just buy the company and make the useless manager unemployed. Manager he laughs disdainfully at the idea and says it is an impressive one. Poking Hang on the shoulder, he says he'll just wait for the broke dude to buy the company. Pissed off by Hang's guts, manager he walks away, fuming as he leaves. After this, Jean goes into panic mode and asks if her fans are really fake. After this, she breaks down in tears while Wen suddenly grabs her hand and tries to calm her down. Wen then says manager he was just trying to make her feel like she owes everything to the company. While she consoles Jan, Hang watches looking determined. After this, Goa Wen thanks Hang and Jean for standing up for her against manager he. Wiping her face, Jan says it's okay since she got to know how much they were looked down on. Furious about this, Jan stomps her foot while insulting manager he. Facing Hang, Wen says he didn't need to stand up for her since they're just colleagues. In response, Hang says he's always had it in for the manager. After this, Wen says she doesn't know if they'll ever meet again and wishes Hang well. Surprised to hear this, Hang plays along and tells her to take care too while they shake hands. A few moments later, Wen zooms off in her car while Hang watches. Afterward, he checks his phone and discovers he is now a millionaire from living recklessly. So he decides to buy himself a plane ticket home. After checking the available flights, Hang goes for the most expensive. Suddenly, he gets rewarded by the system for enjoying first class for the first time. The next day in his dorm room, while Hang sleeps, someone bangs on his door loudly, saying it's time to pay his rent. He suddenly awakes and covers his ears to block out the noise. When the noise continues, Hang gets up and answers the door. On opening the door, his landlady tries to lecture him on how to be more responsible, but Hang quickly pays for 1 year's rent. While his landlady gets busy wondering how he could pay a year's rent at once, Hang says he's added an extra service charge while yawning. After this, he goes back in and slams the door in her face. Hang then heads back to bed thinking he has more time to sleep before catching his flight. His roommate then asks if he hit a jackpot. However, Hang is back in dreamland. After this, he gets rewarded with a villa in Swan Bay by the system and suddenly wakes up to find the keys to the villa in his hands. While he stares at the keys, surprised, his roommate wonders if he's gone mad. Shortly after, Hang dresses up and hops off his bunk. His roommate then asks where he's rushing to. While heading out, Hang says he's catching a flight back home and he won't be back for a while. On his way out, his roommate asks if he won't be packing any luggage. In response, Hang says he doesn't need to. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Hang's father tells his mom that Hang sent some money and says he'll be back soon. When his mom asks how Hang got such an amount of money, his father defends him saying their son is a good person. A few moments later, Hang enters the hospital room and asks about how his mom was faring. Just then his mom sits up and says her vitals look good. but she needs a minor surgery. After this, Hang's father offers him an apple and asks if his boss doesn't mind him taking leave. Hang then reveals that he quit his job, shocking both of his parents. However, his mom commends him and says he'll get a better job. Afterward, Hang asks his dad about the medical bills. In response, his dad says he plans to return Hang's money since the bills have been paid with loans. Upon hearing this, Hang asks where they got the loans from and suggests they repay them as soon as possible. Just then, his father stutters and says it's from relatives. Furiously, Hang asks if by relative, his dad means his uncle and aunt. Suddenly, he furiously heads towards the door and asks his father to pay them back immediately. However, his dad grabs him and tells him to save his money while promising to pay the debt soon. Meanwhile, his mum breaks down in tears, blaming herself for falling sick. Amidst tears, she says she knows how Hang gives all his earnings to the family while living rough and never complaining. Just then, Hang awkwardly smiles and says it's not as hard as she makes it seem. To console his mom, Hang says he made some extra money from side gigs, so he plans to get a specialist for her care. After this, Hang says he's going to his uncle's house to repay the debt. On getting out, he boards a rickshaw and soon regrets his decision. He then asks the driver why the roads are still so bumpy. In response, the driver said the roads had been repaired but were now worse than before. On the way, Hang thinks of how he could have been stuck forever in the hood if his parents didn't support his education. Shortly after, Hang arrives at his uncle's mansion and pays for the transport. Just then, he gets worked up thinking about the gap between their families. Just then, he knocks on the door and Wang, his childhood crush, steps out. Surprised to see her, Hang asks why she's at his uncle's house. While Wang stutters, trying to figure out what to say, Dakai, Hang's cousin, shows up and throws his hand around her neck. He then asks Hang where he thinks his sister-in-law should be. Unsurprised, Hang asks if his uncle is home and says he wants to repay his family's debt. Staring at Hang, Wang Ju wonders if he's being cold because he's still hung up on her. Just then, Dakai asks why she's staring at Hang, and she responds by saying she was checking how pathetic he looks despite working in the city. She then says the countryside is better since her husband can wear Nike and Adidas anytime. On entering the house, Hang's uncle was playing cards with his friends, so he introduced Hang as his nephew who works in the city. After this, his uncle's friends ask ridiculous questions about how much he earns working in the big city. Just then, Dakai says Hang is super successful working like a horse for peanuts. He then asks if Hang has anything left after paying rent since he hears rent is expensive in the city. Facing his uncle, Hang says he came to repay him while Dakai laughs at him. In response, his uncle says there's no need to rush since he'll charge interest anyway. In response, Hang says he's doing fine and doesn't need to borrow. After this, his uncle tells him to quit being polite since he's struggling alone in the city while taking care of the family. Despite this, Hang insists that he had to repay the debt. Just then, his uncle says he won't stop him if insists on paying in installments, so he orders Dakai to bring him a book. Dropping his cards, Hang's uncle snidely says the college graduate wants everything to be crystal clear. A few moments later, Hang asks his uncle to confirm the transfer of the money owed. Shocked to hear this, his uncle checks to confirm the payment and then asks how he got the money. In response, Hang smirks and says it's from working in the city. Just then, Dakai says paying the debt could cost Hang's family their lives since he must have emptied his savings. So, Wang says she'll see Hang off to clear up any misunderstanding and avoid any awkwardness. When she catches up to Hang, Wang says they don't need to act like strangers since they're going to be family soon. She then adds that she knows Hang likes her, but she only sees him as a little brother and nothing else. Hearing this, Hang scornfully laughs and tells her to go take a look at herself in the mirror, shocking Wang. After Hang's comment, Wang turns into a tomato with a vendetta and asks what he means by that. In response, Hang says throwing cow dung at each other and climbing trees doesn't make them childhood sweethearts. With a look of disappointment, Hang then says he's surprised to find out that Wang is not different from the others. Just then, Wang says she understands that Hang is pained and angry because he couldn't clap her. Astounded by her delusion, Hang turns around and says she needs to be checked into an asylum. Just then, Wang walks ahead of Hang and stands in his way to say she despises him despite his academic skills. She then adds that her life living with his uncle is so much better than his and his family's. After this, she says Hang's mom doesn't get better regardless of how much they spend. In response, Hang asks if she's done talking. He then tells her that her life sucks, yet she's bragging about it everywhere. He then adds that no one will truly cherish her since a toad isn't as self-satisfied as her. Pained by his response, Wang points her finger at him while he gives her a rundown of everything that rocks about his life and sucks about hers. After this, he tells her to stop ranting and spend some time in front of a mirror. Suddenly, Hang gets rewarded with a house waiting for demolition by the system for cutting off his relationship with Wang without hesitation. While Wang continues to rant, Hang looks confused, wondering what the demolition is all about. After this, he grabs her pointed finger and turns it to her. He then tells her to stick with Dakai and stop harming others. Afterwards, while Hang walks home, Dasha drives past him and gives him a surprise dirt shower. He then stops beside Hang and says he didn't notice him because he is in a rush to a construction site. After this, Dakai says he doesn't have time to greet him properly because he is the contractor in charge of the city's construction and road repairs. He then adds that Hang can come to him for work on the construction site. Just then, Hang realizes why the road construction ended up in such a state, so he decides to take action and remove the disaster for the people. Later that day at the City Construction Bureau, after they met, Engineer Kang tells Hang to visit him for tea whenever he has time. After this, the system rewards Hang with 100 land certificates for contributing to the homeland. While Hang stares, shocked by this, the system says his rewards are determined by his actions. He then says he doesn't blame the system and asks why it seems the entire world is about to be handed to him. Sometime later at the hospital, while Hang peels some apples for his mom, she commends him on being a considerate son. A few moments later, the doctor walks in and announces that the surgery was successful, and he has arranged for Hang's mother's discharge. Just then, Hang says his mom is still recovering and needs to be observed, so he offers to pay the fees required. However, the doctor says he has already processed her discharge, so he orders the nurses to pack up the patient's belongings. Looking like a pissed John Wick, Hang asks the doctor what he means. Meanwhile, Hang mother worries that things might get out of hand. Just then, the doctor impatiently says the patient has to leave since she's feeling better. Hearing this, Hang angrily slams the knife on a table nearby, startling the doctor. The doctor claims Hang is trying to cause trouble in the hospital and threatens to call security. So Hang's mother says there's no need to spend more money since she's already better and will be more comfortable at home. The doctor then tells Hang to listen to his mom like every good son does. Facing the nurses, the doctor tells them to thoroughly clean up the room and leave no traces of poverty. Hearing this, Hang clenches his fists while the doctor walks out of the room. Hang then tells his mom to eat the apple and says he needs to take care of something urgently. Hang's mom tells him not to fight, but he responds and says he won't use force. Back in his office, the doctor tells Dakai on a call that his friend's wife can move into the hospital room immediately. He then says a sprained ankle should be taken seriously since it takes 100 days to heal. While Dakai commends the doctor thanks Dakai for rescuing Hang's family when they delayed paying the medical bills. Hang then promises to thank the doctor properly later. Meanwhile, Hang has been eavesdropping the conversation and realizes the doctor was bribed. He then decides it is time to play with money. So he heads to the hospital director's office and knocks on the door. On entering the office, the dean asks who he was, and he says he's an ordinary patient. In response, the dean then says he doesn't attend to patients in his office. Hang then takes his seat and says he'd like to discuss donating a building to the hospital. Surprised, the dean asks if he knows how much it costs to donate a building. While the dean sizes him up, Hang says he has looked into it and there will be no problems at all. After declaring his intentions, Hang says he wants to donate a building because he's discovered that sometimes there isn't enough room. He then adds that he'd like the dean to investigate corrupt practices in the hospital. In response, the dean says he understands the lack of beds. However, he says there's no need for baseless suspicions. Just then, Hang points out that some people are taking dirty money to give scarce beds to special connections. Suddenly, the dean stands and says he strongly condemns taking bribes for such purposes. After this, Hang explains what the doctor was trying to do with his mum. However, the dean accuses him of making it up since it was against the hospital's procedures. Pissed, the dean tells Hang to get his facts straight before making stories up. Just then, Hang calms him down and tells him to listen to a recording. So the dean takes the recorder and plays out the conversation between the doctor and Dakai. After this, the dean says the recording might be edited since he doesn't believe such things happen in the hospital. Surprised, Hang wonders if the dean was deliberately trying to cover up the crime. So he picks up his phone and calls Engineer Kang from the city construction unit to ask if he has time to take on the project. After this, Hang asks the engineer to come to the dean's office to discuss the details. While the dean thinks he's acting, Hang hands him the phone to speak with Engineer Kang. On taking the phone, the dean discovers it really is Engineer Kang on the phone. While Hang plasters a knowing smile across his face, the dean hangs up the call. Shortly after, Hang asks why he needs to fake a recording if he could donate a building. In response, the dean says he doesn't have enough evidence. Hang then offers to donate 2 buildings, surprising the dean. Rising to his feet, Hang says his only request is for the guilty doctor to be punished. On his way out, the dean asks for his name and Hang responds saying it's not important, since he's just a kid from a farming family. After Hang leaves, the dean requests the recent discharge records to see which patient was discharged just after surgery. Later, a nurse tells the doctor that the dean is waiting to see him outside the ward. Shortly after, the doctor begs on his knees to save his job. However, the dean says the hospital can't afford to keep someone like him around. Meanwhile, in Dakai's home, Wang asks Dakai if they'd be able to buy a house in the city soon. Dasha says they will, but gets interrupted by his brother who walks in and asks why his wife was told to pack her things and leave the hospital. Just then, his brother adds that his wife's injury has worsened and he's been denied access to the other room because of that. Surprised, Dakai jumps on his feet, splashing water all over the place. He then picks up his phone and calls the doctor. However, the call didn't go through. Meanwhile, Hang and his mom stand while some workers move some equipment into the courtyard. His mom then asks how expensive it was to get a caretaker and all the equipment. In response, Hang says the hospital is footing the bill as compensation. Just then, Dakai arrives at the scene and asks Hang if he's responsible for his brother's wife's loss of the hospital bed despite how much he spent to secure the bed. Surprised, Hang's mother asks Dakai what he's talking about. Pretending to be ignorant, Hang then accuses Dakai of being responsible for the incident at the hospital. Suddenly, Dakai stutters and says it's normal for someone to be discharged when they get better. He then asks why the hospital arranged a caretaker for Hang's mom. In response, Hang says it's compensation for the doctor's misconduct. Hearing this, Dakai says it took him and his brother time to build connections and Hang has to take responsibility for his plight. Hang then says there is no need for a big boss like Dakai to extort a poor guy like him. He then asks Dakai if it's possible for a poor guy like him to make a big boss fall so hard. While Dakai gets worked up over this, Hang turns and says it's probably karma catching up with him. Hang then walks away, talking about people who think everything can be solved with money. On his way out, Dakai says they're going to die poor. Hang's mother then says Dakai looks furious and worries about their safety. In response, Hang says he'd like to see him try anything stupid. Meanwhile, while Dakai drives home, he thought he drove past someone who looked like Manager Kang. However, he brushes it off thinking Manager Kang has no business in the slums. Back at Hang's house, Hang arrives packing gifts and openly tries to thank Hang for his contribution to the reload construction. However, Hang quickly tells a lie to cover up the story. Reading the mood, Kang plays along. After this, Hang tells his mom to go inside first since he has something to give Kang. Shortly after, Hang explains that he doesn't want his family to find out about his contributions to the construction. In response, Kang says he has handled what Hang asked him to, while Hang compliments him on working efficiently. Later, Dakai gets notified on a call that he doesn't need to get involved with the road repairs anymore. Shocked to hear this, he tried to convince Zhao, but he was told that his team's qualification didn't pass the review. After this, Zhao ends the call and says he has no choice since Dakai offended Kang. Sometime later, Dakai visits Zhao at the club with gifts and reminds him that they already agreed that he'll get the contract and Zhao gets his share. However, Zhao pretends he doesn't exist. Dakai then places his gifts on the table and suggests that they adjust the percentage of the cut. When Zhao still refuses to acknowledge him, Dakai then says everyone knows the qualification review is just a formality. Suddenly, Zhao furiously knocks his gifts off the table and says a few cigarettes can't make him break the law with Darsha. Darsha then stoops to pick up his gifts and says that's not what he meant. So, he offers to give Zhao 50%. In response, Zhao furiously says Darsha tried to harm him after he treated him like a brother. He then had Darsha thrown out with his gifts. Somewhere else in the club, Zhao visits Hang and Kang. He then apologizes for keeping them waiting. Afterward, Zhao thanks Hang for his contributions to the road construction. In response, Hang says he did it for his old parents and not the people, surprising Kang. After this, he asks Zhao if the roads won't deteriorate after 1 year. In response, Zhao says the road will meet his expectations. Hang then says he hopes he won't be disappointed. Just then, the system rewards Hang for showing high moral character. Meanwhile, in Hang's second uncle's yard, Wang screams at Dakai for neglecting his chores and playing Call of Duty all day. Just then she says she regrets choosing him over Hang. Pissed by this, Dakai asks her to repeat what she said. Just then, Wang pokes his chest and says he's not different from a waterproof towel. After this, she walks away from Dark-Eye and says she's going to find Hang since they both grew up together. However, Dark-Eye grabs her and sends her to the great beyond with his hands. At Hang's residence, some documents were delivered to Hang's parents. When they asked Kang what it meant, he says the road construction will affect 1 square meter of their property, and as compensation for that, a new house will be built for them. While they freak out about this, Kang asks if that is enough. In response, Hang's mom says it is more than enough, while Hang's father calls him out to share the good news. If you made it to the end, confuse the fake fans by commenting RIP Wang. Leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and subscribe to the channel for similar content. And as always, thanks for watching.